Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Today we celebrate the solemnity of the Annunciation of our Blessed Virgin Mother. Mary's simple act of obedience changed the course of world history and is a key part of Marian devotion. We discuss why Mary is important with Rachel Fulton Brown, who also looks at examples of Franciscan devotion to Mary. Dr. Rachel Fulton Brown is an associate professor of history at the University of Chicago, author of many books, including Mary and the Art of Prayer. Follow her Fencing Bear at Prayer substack blog. It actually is quite an entertaining substack. Rachel, great to speak with you again. How are you?
I thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
So, we've spoken about this book before and Marian devotion in medieval times. I'd like to begin by asking your personal and maybe even your devotional insights into the Annunciation of Mary and how pivotal a day that is in just biblical history.
Well, so it's interesting that you frame this as a problem of the day in history, right? I'm right now this quarter starting teaching my course on the Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, and of course the most important date in the whole of his story is March 25th. Mm-hmm. But that shows up in the appendices, and you don't realize, why is March 25th so important in the Lord of the Rings? Well, it's the day that the Dark Tower falls, right? It's the defeat of Sauron and the destruction of Barad-dûr. And of course, Tolkien, one of the things I do in my class is talk about his Catholic faith and how it's like, so all of his stories and all of his thinking about art and poetry and creativity and God are shaped by his growing up Catholic and very much by his devotion to Our Lady. I've learned that more recently, that he had a deep devotion to the Immaculate Conception. So that he put the most significant date, even in our sort of mythological stories, is March 25th is a great sort of mystery. Tolkien was also, of course, playing off of the significance of the date for medieval Christian devotion. If he put the fall of the Dark Tower on that same day, in medieval discussions of the calendar, they'll say it's not just March 25th is the day when Gabriel comes to Our Lady and announces her conception of Christ, but it's also the day on which God created everything. Mm-hmm. It's either March 18th or it's the octave after March 25th. But the day of the Annunciation is the day of creation. It's also in medieval understanding taken to be the day of the crucifixion, mm-hmm. right? So it's the time in this wonderful liturgical symbolic enfolding. It's like March 25th is the date of all dates. Everything happens right on this day.
And there's a great coinciding between December 25th and March 25th in the medieval mind as well. And so all of this comes to a greater unfolding there. In your own work, especially when you unveil those connections, what have you seen people's reactions to that fact?
Well, so the hardest thing for most modern Christians in sort of appreciating these mysteries is medieval thinking about everything is like this, mm-hmm. right? And I brought up Tolkien because he's actually a good way in for most people to think about the way it's not just symbolic resonances, it's reality folds in on itself constantly. So if I'm trying to say, Mary she's the mother of God, and in the moment of the Annunciation, he enters into her womb, right, that she conceives him. But in the medieval understanding, Christ entering into Mary's womb is the Creator entering into his creation, which then makes her not just his mother, but it's like a gateway to all creation. And you mentioned my book, Marian, the Art of Prayer, that a good deal of what I try to do there is show modern readers the way in which this constant overlay of symbolism happens in praying things like the Hours of the Virgin, which is more complicated because it includes the Psalms, but also something as simple as the Ave Maria. I mean, it's like every single time you say the Ave Maria in the medieval imagination, you're invoking all of these references and resonances of all the creatures in creation. And a good deal of what I enjoy showing people is how people, particularly medieval Franciscans, they love this kind of overlapping significance of everything that Mary is. Francis talks about her this way, that she's the palace, the tabernacle, the house, the robe, the servant, the mother. And it's like you're trying to understand all of these metaphors of her as container, but it's not just a metaphor, it's reality. She's the mother of God, and so she's the place where he enters into time and into our incarnate experience.
How did the medieval Christian culture think about prayer in the rhythm of life, work, the annual calendar?
So I've been working a lot on these Franciscan devotions over the last year or so, and one of the very interesting things about the Franciscans, of course, is not just that they're in the cities preaching to people, but that many of them are men whose fathers were craftsmen. So we have in the 13th century, particularly the early members of the Franciscan order, they come from a context in which they had actual craft skills. So they're thinking about, say, the Franciscans, for example, in Italy and in Florence might have like textile working skills. And so when they talk about God and they talk about his making, creation or his mother, they fold into it all of these actual artistic techniques, right? And therefore, one of the ways in thinking about prayer that comes up, particularly in late medieval devotions, is they'll think of prayer as itself also a kind of craft skill, like a making of things. And this works beautifully when they're meditating on Mary, because they start meditating on her as she's the not just the image of, but the reality of the tabernacle or temple that God gave Moses the pattern to design, right? He says Moses on the mountain is given the pattern that he's meant to make the tabernacle and all its furniture, or Solomon is given the wisdom to make the temple and all of its furniture. Late medieval prayer practice is it's a wonderful like craft skill resonance, which I think is for us in our world now, when we're all worried about what the robots are going to take from us again, right? In the Industrial Revolution, many of the machines took away people's hand skills. They took, weaving and textile work and metallurgy and things like that. Now we're worried that, the robots are going to take our voice and our prayer, our poetry and things like that. I think that the medieval prayer practices are a good way for us to reground ourselves in that sense of every single time we say a prayer or, the Ave Maria, we're participating in that craftsmanship that God calls us to as, our maker. So the medieval prayer is, it's very material, it's very concrete, as well as very, transcendent. It's looking vertically as well as horizontally, as it were. This I'm getting from a great new book that I've been reading the past few months by a young scholar, Bjorn Buschbeck, who did a full study of these late medieval prayers where you're weaving like garments for Mary by way of saying thousands and thousands of Ave Marias. Prayer is it's like fundamental and practical in the late medieval practices.
Does that create the bedrock for the development of Marian devotional prayers and ultimately the Marian office?
It definitely does. So the Ave Maria itself, and this I talk about in my book, Marian the Art of Prayer. It starts out as recitation of so many Aves because it's mimicking the Psalms. There are 150 Psalms, so you say 150 Aves for the Rosary. But the name of the practice itself, Rosary, it shows that they're thinking of it in terms of flowers, right? And they're miracle stories of people saying the Ave Maria, and it's a little like the miracle of the Lady of Our Lady of the Americas, Our Lady of Guadalupe, with the roses in the tilma, right? That every Ave that you say is like crafting a flower for a garland of flowers that you're making for Mary. And this kind of practice is grounded in as well the saying as the office.
My guest is Dr. Rachel Fulton Brown, and amongst her numerous achievements, we are talking about her book, Marian the Art of Prayer, on the Solemnity of the Annunciation of our Blessed Virgin Mother. We're continuing on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Beat. I'm talking with Dr. Rachel Fulton Brown, Associate Professor of History at the University of Chicago, author of Mary and the Art of Prayer. Rachel, you were just expounding to us a little more about the medieval imagination of Marian devotion and Marian prayer.
Yes, and I brought some example. I brought an example because it's hard when I'm talking so abstractly about what they do, and it sounds like, how do they fold in all of these images. But I have an example from an English Franciscan, 13th century, named Walter of Wimborne, and he wrote poetry, and one of his most extended poems it's an Ave Maria. It's Ave Virgo Mater Christi, so it's a meditation on all of the different meanings of the Ave. It's 164 stanzas long, so I won't read the whole thing for you. But it's the thing is what he does is in 164 variants on saying Mary is the key to the mystery, shows the way in which she is all of these craft things that we've been talking about, so the temple and so forth. And for example, in one of the stanzas, she's the key and the ship. So she's Hail, Virgin, key of heaven, hail, new ship, weighed down with novel wares, through whom on full sails is brought the full light from heaven to the blind and wandering. And so that she is, the key to our passage to heaven. But this wonderful image of her as a ship, it's taken from Proverbs, where the strong woman is like she has her ship brings bread from afar. She's like, bringing in all of this, these goods to the world. And in the medieval meditation, that phrase describing Mary is describing her bringing bread, right, Christ, into the world. And so Walter is playing off of this new ship weighed down with novel wares, through whom on full sails is brought the full light from heaven to the blind and wandering. And you get just in that one very dense image all of this wonderfulness of how she carries Christ to us and brings light. And so she's like this wonderful merchant ship. That's just one, right? I have another that shows how he can carry on. Hail, maidenly gem. Hail, bright star of the sea. Hail, treasure chest of the divinity. Hail, torch and lantern, whom the supernal light sets light, firebrand of eternal light. This kind of image, I love this because medieval artisans are always very interested in light, and we think about stained glass windows or reliquaries covered with all of the beautiful gemstones. And in thinking about them as creatures, they're also therefore thinking about their relationship to God and how as creatures they show us God. But she herself is this gem and bright star of the sea that carries within herself the light. And if you think of the light streaming through the stained glass windows in the cathedrals, or the way the light reflects off the settings of the gemstones on the reliquaries and such, they're trying to contain in these metaphors the mystery of what it means for God to become incarnate through her. Walter just kept going and going and going because he never managed. Some of his meditation is on how it's impossible to describe her because you're still describing this mystery of God's entering into his own creation through her. And I started with Tolkien. Tolkien loved that mystery. He was very interested in this problem of how we as artists are made in the image and likeness of a maker, but therefore that God as artist, when at the incarnation, enters into his own artifact. He enters into his own creature. And that's always when I talk about this for to say what we've lost, what I hope we can still gain again, is that amazing mystery of his participation in his own creation as our creator through her.
It's very clear, not just from reading your book, but also looking into the Marian devotional history of the medieval era, that there was a very expansive, elevated, lofty imagination of Mary and her role, not just in salvation history, but in devotional and prayer life of the Catholic. Can you please speak to that?
When you said that, I was saying, oh no, but that makes it sound like she's so inaccessible.
Oh gosh, no.
But that, I mean, I think that it's one of the wonderful things that I've recognized now, studying all of this, craft work and the way in which they're thinking of their own prayers as participating and making crafts for her is this very real sense of mediation. I mean, you're saying how do we have connection with God, and it's through her as literally our mediator of the incarnation, and I'd say all of the prayers that they're practicing are trying to capture that mystery, and it's at the same level of, and she's the mother of the child. So I mean, Francis of Assisi is of course also famous for the practice of setting up a Christmas creche, which he does at Greccio, and that sense of how God enters into our world as a child and as a baby. I mean, the late medieval meditations are just as much on that, because God should show up in thunderbolts and lightning, not as a baby, and yet that's how he came to us.
So we're talking about this notion of not just her being an elevated individual in salvation history, but a tremendous sense of accessibility, so much so that numerous authors that you've quoted urge not just the religious but the lay faithful to keep seeking her out in the work of their craft through the day. Please share with us more about that.
Yes, that absolutely, and that's what I'm trying to emphasize with this craft imagery. That the prayers that I'm talking about, I mean, in Marian the Art of Prayer, I'm talking about the Office of the Virgin, and lay people use that. But that's how we know that they did, because we have all their books, these books of hours with the Psalms and such in them. But this sort of great love of our ability as makers of textiles or gyms or buildings or communities, cities, that late medieval Marian devotion is so. I mean, it's very urban in the way I'm describing it. And it really is that they're making their cities as they're praying to her, and many of the meditations that we have are also about sort of imagining her as a building that they are crafting by way of their prayers. So it's all very, I mean, incarnational and grounded in, if my life of making garments or pottery or books can be an act of prayer, then I'm participating in that mystery as well.
Share with us how that late medieval imagination also saw Mary as a window through which all the things that people went through in their daily life could be seen through a spiritual lens, by imagining how Mary would perceive it.
So that's another layer that is added to the Rosary meditations by the late Middle Ages, that you are taking each of the decades as a meditation on an event. And I'd say, again, our general meditation today is on entry into history, that it matters that you are recognizing God's participation in our life and time through the Annunciation, the Nativity, the presentation in the temple, the flight to Egypt. That we are. It's interesting for modern Christians. We're so used to this meditation on the life of Christ as a historical person. It's very popular since the 19th century. It's hard to read the medieval ones and recognize what they're trying to say is, and this is God, right? Over and over and over again. Can you see that God so humbled himself that there he is walking along the road? And I think if there's a major difference between medieval devotion and modern devotion, it's that it was harder for them to see him as simply that baby or that human being, because they're so used to thinking of him in his majesty. Whereas for us, it tends to be a little bit different. Like we're very interested in the historical person that we can portray in movies or paint in a picture or something like that. And I think modern devotion has a harder time with the majestic imagery that the medieval devotions always have as their frame.
From there, just to also share with us that by the full flourishing of these kinds of Marian devotions, it was very clear that Marian imagination was taking over the late medieval mind, and so the lay populace were all subsumed into popular lay Marian devotion as well.
Right, and again, I would caution say it's Marian devotion, but they see her as the frame for God.
Yep.
So, and that's what I really emphasize in both of my books, that there's not Marian devotion and Christ devotion in the later Middle Ages. There's Christ devotion through Marian imagery, and so that it's the same. It's like you see Mary always represented holding her son, or standing under the cross, or in the Assumption images, she's being crowned by him in heaven. That she's always in relationship to him because she's showing us, she makes him visible to us. I mean, literally through the flesh, because she gives birth to him. But then in contemplation, through this problem of how do we see God? How can we even comprehend him? How can we put our minds around him? Well, she, both in her, she gives birth to him through her body, but in her contemplation somehow contains him as well. And that is, for the medieval Christians, as much a mystery as her giving birth, right? How can she think God? It's a I mean, you try to say that out loud. It's like, do we really understand God? No, of course we can't. And yet somehow, she's so close to him in relationship that she can contain wisdom.
Rachel, tremendous joy. Thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you for having me.
My guest has been Dr. Rachel Fulton Brown. She is Associate Professor of History at the University of Chicago and author of Mary and the Art of Prayer. Do procure this book if you're interested. And we've been talking about Marian devotion. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.